To discuss the political right, we're joined in studio by Dr. Evan Cohen. He's a former foreign media advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, and by Jeremy Saltan, he's an advisor for Yamina Party. Evan, we'll start with you. Looking at the poll, Bennett is well placed, it seems, to replace Netanyahu.
Well, first of all, the poll doesn't put Netanyahu against Bennett. It puts all the right wing, basically Netanyahu and Saar, for example, from the Likud against Bennett. I think that if it had been a head-to-head, it would have appeared slightly different.
Okay, but let's talk about the results that we do see. Bennett with 20%. That's a risk for Netanyahu.
In what way? I mean, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many % of the public support Bennett. It matters how many seats that they will get in the elections. And I think Bennett will do pretty well in the elections. Okay, there's no doubt about that. But it's Likud against Yamina. That's what one has to see. So if Netanyahu isn't the actual representative of the Likud, it'll be someone else. And the 43% that support Netanyahu will largely go to whoever else comes from within the Likud. Bennett's support is all the right wing, which are not part of the Likud. That's something people have to understand. And the right wing, thankfully, is broad. It's not just the Likud. And so I think that whenever we have two right-wing candidates running against one another, you will have the Likud candidate, whom the Likud will support, and another candidate, whoever that may be, that everybody else will support. So even if it hadn't been Bennett, even if it had been anyone else from the right wing, up against Netanyahu, you would get very similar results. Okay.
Evan, we're seeing 10,000 demonstrators in one evening outside the Prime Minister's residence Saturday night. We're seeing demonstrations on Ayalon Freeway and in Caesarea. And I'm wondering, where are the protesters from the right, those who usually call King Bibi? We're seeing 200 people, maybe. He doesn't seem to be able to bring the people out to the streets.
I'm one of the people who used to go out on the streets. I'm not going out now simply because of coronavirus, and I think many other people would agree with me on that point.
So suddenly health versus ideology?
No, it's not a question of health versus ideology. I think that the left wing, and first of all, it's not 10,000. I mean, the facts are clear. It's not 10,000. But however many it is,
police claims it's 10,000.
However many are going out on the streets, it's quite clear that this has nothing to do with ideology. There's a lot of money behind this campaign, and I think that Jeremy can agree with me on this here. And we heard Bezalel Smotrich from Yamina also talking about this. It's not ideology. It's anything but ideology.
It seems to be that it's a lot of ideology as well, so let's give credit to the demonstrators as well. But I'm asking, where are the protesters from the right? They're all keeping to their health?
They have no reason to go out at the moment. I think that it's also much more difficult to garner support from protesters when you're in power than when you're in opposition. Opposition find it easier.
That's true.
I mean, we can remember when there were left-wing governments in power, the protesters filled Kikar Rabin in Tel Aviv. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of right-wing protesters.
Okay. Jeremy, I want to turn to you. Good news for Bennett, the polls from the last few days. Did you speak to him today? How does he feel?
Yeah, I did. He's in a great mood. You might expect that. You mentioned one poll. There was another poll that came out yesterday that actually had Bennett.
Poll,
in first place among all of the candidates for Prime Minister. Of course, there have been several polls throughout the last couple of weeks, seen us in a position of even more than doubling the amount of seats that we have currently. So obviously, you know, Naftali Bennett is in a pretty good mood. And I think we need to talk about why it is that the right wing is flocking to Bennett and they're leaving the Likud. You know, this reminds me a lot of 2006 when Likud dropped to 12 seats. You know, people can talk all day about how Likud is the leadership party, but let's look at history. And the fact is Likud has had quite a few drops over the years. And what we've seen is historical parties such as Labor that has created this country, as well as, you know, the Bayit Yehudi, the Mafdal. We see these parties going ahead and collapsing. What people want are leaders. They're looking at people. They're not looking at parties anymore. And the truth is the right wants to see an application of sovereignty. They want to prevent a Palestinian state. What they want is a free economy. What they want is someone who can actually lead us through this corona crisis, as opposed to what the current administration is doing.
I'm sure Bennett is satisfied, but even if elections, fourth round is to come, that will happen in November, and that's a long, long time in Israeli terms of politics. I do want to ask you, though, about the courting game between Likud and Yamina. It's been going on for a while now behind the scenes. That last move yesterday by Ayelet Shaked to bring voting on the Supreme Court, overriding the Supreme Court, to bring that to vote vote. That plays very much to the hands of Netanyahu as well, although they can get credit.
Look, let's be very honest here. We care about judicial reform. That was on our platform, election after election. I would welcome the Prime Minister going ahead and adopting our platform. I was mentioning sovereignty before. That was another thing that Netanyahu took from our platform, promised the Israeli people, even set a deadline of July 1st and didn't even meet it. So again, I'm very happy to see Netanyahu as Prime Minister talking about the stuff that we've been talking about. But he's the Prime Minister. We're in the opposition. It's on him to actually execute it, and that is not something he's doing, and that is why the people are leaving the Likud and they're coming over to Yamina.
Okay. Evan, it seemed like Netanyahu panicked when Yamina's Bezalel Smotrich presented a bill to investigate judges in early July. Why is that?
I don't think he panicked. I think what we had here were coalition considerations. This is something people have to understand. The government in Israel, unlike the US administration, for example, isn't in power with a single party behind the leader. So what we have at the moment is a government which is composed of, I think, 6 or 7 parties. I can't even remember because there are all these splinters going on there. 6 or 7 parties. And the coalition basically did not want this legislation to pass. And I might add, unfortunately, but on the other hand, when Yamina were in the government and Ayelet Shaked was the Minister of Justice 4 years, none of this happened. Yeah. And one would ask why none of this happened.
I'm happy to answer that.
Wait, I haven't finished yet. I haven't finished yet. Excuse me, I haven't finished yet, and this is extremely important to put. Then member of Knesset, who is now the Minister of Internal Security, Amir Ohana, presented a bill which would have dramatically changed the way we govern. It would have allowed ministers to appoint their own legal advisors. And this is something that Ayelet Shaked basically stopped.
Yeah, that is incorrect. Look, Evan, let's talk at least about the facts.
The law hasn't passed.
First of all, if you read that, if you read the last 2 lines of that bill, and I'm very familiar with Ohana, who then was Justice Minister and did not do any of that when he was Justice Minister, you'll see that Ayelet Shaked first proposed that in the previous Knesset before Ohana was even, because that's what you do on pieces of.
She changed the law.
Listen,
she did not present his proposal.
We can go ahead and talk about this over and over again. As the minister in charge of the Ministerial Committee of Legislative Affairs, she wanted to go ahead and bring this to a vote. Yariv Levin, which I'm sure you know very well, the person who's now Speaker of the House, very close to Netanyahu, he had veto power, and he said, listen, let's not go ahead and do this now. Let's wait with it. And Shaked was not able to go ahead and put that forward. If you want to go ahead and throw this, you have to actually go ahead and talk about the details as they happen in real time. Ayelet Shaked was the first person to put that bill on the table.
The bill that Ayelet Shaked put forward would not allow a personal appointment by the minister. She required a committee to approve the candidates. Okay. That's a whole big difference.
Evan, Jeremy, sadly, we need to part in a minute, so I want to ask both of you for your assessment. Are we facing a 4th election? There is no budget. We're into the 8th month of the year. No agreement around a budget. Do you think we're facing a 4th election as soon as November?
I think that none of the parties in government want an election at the moment. I think Yamina might want an election, and maybe the Arab List wants an election too. That's very possible. Unfortunately, I think that's where we're going. I think that because this government...
Yair Lapid would want an election, probably.
Yair Lapid doesn't want an election. Trust me on that one. He doesn't want an election.
Why? Explain.
Because he'll be up in the opposition. He'd much rather try and build himself over the next couple of years and show that Gantz is useless than actually run in an election at the moment.
So you think Kahol Lavan and Netanyahu will be agreeing on a budget for what, a year?
No.
Or
look,
2 years?
I can't see Kahol Lavan agreeing with the Likud on anything. That's the problem. They're in opposition within the government. That is why the government isn't functioning. The previous government, the so-called interim government, functioned a whole lot better on all fronts, including on the coronavirus front and the current
we knew this is coming with such a coalition. Yeah. Jeremy, your assessment for elections?
My assessment is that the worst thing that you could possibly do during this corona crisis, both on the health level, on the economic level, the fact that we're seeing an increase of people in the unemployment line, suicides, the worst thing you can do is go to an election. So unlike what Evan might think, Yamina does not, despite the polls, which we talked about at the start of the show, we do not want to see an election.
Join the government.
Once we were not invited to this government, as I'm sure you recall, Evan, and that's Netanyahu's choice. And considering what a colossal failure it's been, I'm very happy to sit in opposition and not be a part of that. So what I'll tell you is this: when the corona crisis is over, and I really encourage the government to adopt the plan that already back in March his defense minister, Naftali Bennett, put out to deal with the second wave even before it happened, that yes, when we can, we should bring down this government, but only after the coronavirus is dealt with appropriately.
Okay. Dr. Evan Cohen and Jeremy Saltan, thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming to studio.